Hey, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Richard Burke. I'm Executive Director of Western Liberty Network. It is Saturday, 1:04 p.m. on July 16th, and today we're going to have a training on the basics of opposition research from former State Representative Patrick Sheehan. Patrick now runs a political consultancy and is also in the real estate business on the eastern side of the metropolitan area. And he is a very good conservative and has an excellent track record and knows his stuff as he works on various campaigns. Before I begin, I'm going to do a couple of things here. The first I'm going to do is share the screen. I want everyone to be aware of the Western Liberty Network website and the resources that are available here. Here you see our homepage. At the homepage is always the newest thing that we're doing. And the newest thing we're doing right now is the training you're a part of right here or watching the recording of with Patrick Sheehan. You just see what's on here, sign on with Zoom, and you're in. Scroll down a little further and you see various things that Western Liberty Network has done on the left-hand side. And on the right-hand side are some resources where you can see some PowerPoint slideshows of previous training topics. You can see speeches or hear speeches from people who have made presentations to Western Liberty Network in the past. A lot of good resources here. If you go to the training tab, you'll see at the top the kinds of training we provide and the venues that we provide the training in. If you scroll down, you'll see the basics of our training documents. These are all PDF documents that are designed to be provided with a live on-site training. That said, these are able to stand up on their own. So find a topic that you like the basics of lobbying, and here you will see the handout that always comes with it. We have about 30 topics or so that people can look at. And if you scroll down to the bottom, you can download a single PDF file containing all of the training documents in their current versions. Then if you scroll down a little more, you'll see recordings of our various Saturday Zoom sessions. This one is being recorded right now, and it will be put up on the screen as soon as we're finished within a couple of hours. But there's a year and a half of topics here. There's something for everyone, a lot to learn off of. We do annual conferences. The next one is on February 3rd and 4th. We'll be at the Embassy Suites in Tigard. And we do live on-site training. But with these online resources, people can literally build their own training program for the skills they think which will be helpful for them going forward. And if you decide that you like what you see, you can go to the Support WLN tab and you can make a contribution. Western Liberty Network is a 501c3 organization, so all contributions are fully tax deductible. On the left-hand side are one-time contributions. The right-hand side, automatic monthly contributions. All of these things are done through PayPal, so you know that they are secure. Western Liberty Network, as a 501c3 organization, does not endorse or support any political candidate or political party. We don't even support or oppose the candidates we train, but we do provide training to folks that they are free to use however they like in the campaigns they care about. We support limited government concepts and cater to limited government activists, but this information is available to everyone. And so now we are back on the screen, and as soon as I can figure out how to do it here, I'm going to turn over the host functions to Patrick Sheehan and hand the microphone over to him. I can't hear anyone. I've installed a new sound card and I can't hear anyone. So if you need to communicate with me, you want me to feed a question to Patrick while he's making his presentation, feel free to do it through the chat window. So with that, I will make Patrick the host and I will hand the floor over to him.
Terrific. Well, thank you for thinking of me and having me on your educational program here. I see we have two people named Michelle. Are you guys the same person? Just signed on twice?
No, I just put my last name.
Oh, sure. So there are two different Michelles on here.
Correct.
That's right.
Oh, great. Since there's only two, would you mind just telling me what you might be running for or considering running for? So if I do have an example, I can sort of tailor it to you guys.
I'm not running. I'm actually working on a campaign. I'm a campaign manager. We have a candidate for Senate,
State
US,
Senate or US?
US State Senate, yes.
US Senate. Okay. And Michelle B.
I also work on various campaigns, and I am anticipating a run for county commissioner in
Okay.
24.
Okay, terrific. Well, the U.S. Senate is a whole different ballgame when it comes to opposition research, but I can definitely give you some information on county commission, and a lot of that stuff is going to be more tailored to you. There is a difference between the U.S. Senate is when you're talking about opposition research, we're going to have a little bit of a distinction between opposition research that is a FOIA request, which is federal, which is a Freedom of Information Act, and a public records request, which is a local one, and we'll get into that in a little bit. So it's nice that we have one of each of you on here. Quick intro about me. I was in the House of Representatives in 2011 and 12. Prior to that, I had an advertising agency, which I have since transitioned into a political consulting firm. And I've run all sorts of races, everything from governor down to school board. So I've seen and been a part of just about every part of opposition research. It's a really fun topic for me. It's by no means the extent of what I do, but it's something that I certainly have in the toolbox for everything. So the reasons why opposition research is important. Well, when you get into races, it's all about contrast. And in advertising, we call it a unique selling proposition. It's something that you are something different than your competitor. And opposition research helps you figure out what that is to draw the furthest things apart. Now, in politics, even when you're a crazy lefty liberal, you're going to agree on like 85% of things because it comes down to potholes and municipal things, very basic. Aligning with federal law if you're doing transportation things on the local level. So we have to figure out what that 15% looks like and where you're different and where you can draw that line with voters to show them the difference between you. So contrast is one of the more important things. There's also criticism of what your opponent has done or plans to do, and opposition research allows you to articulate that and to provide evidence of what they did or what they plan to do. It also gives you competitive vulnerability, so you can see if they have said something, stood for something, done something in the past that would cause their base to not like what they see, or the moderates in the middle to sway from one side to the other, or to even engage your base in wanting to stop them. So if you have someone who's an Antifa sympathizer or something that's on the opposite side, the middle would not like that, and your side would actually see that as something that might get them more riled up and excited to help you. So and the fourth thing of why it's really, really important is it gives you the opportunity to define your opponent. And this is one of the things that it's usually the first person out of the gate that's able to make a definition. It's the one that sticks, because if you're able to go out and define your opponent in a certain way using opposition research, they're immediately on their heels and they have to defend why they think that that's either not important or not true. And if you have good opposition research, you will always be able to prove that it is true. So any questions on those four?
Yes, for the definition rule, does that count if you're the one that makes the definition about your candidate instead of like your opponent, like trying
Absolutely.
to mudslide?
Yes, yeah, you're totally right, and thank you for that articulation. Yes, if you get out the gate first and define yourself before your opponent defines you, that's usually the thing that sticks and that stays with them. You have to have the money behind you to get it out there and to make sure that people hear it, of course. But defining yourself is very important. That's why you got to do it really early. And why, if you catch your opponent asleep at the wheel and you can define them, then they're going to spend the entire time not trying to define themselves, but trying to defend themselves. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the types of opposition research there are and kind of show you some of the differences. There are, let's see, I identified in mine, and really there's probably more, but I identified 6 main categories. You have publicly available information, which is things like city council recordings, county commission recordings, minutes of meetings. These are the things that are usually very publicly available and easy to find. So you can go on to whatever website. Usually governments are very sensitive to the fact that they need to be transparent. And so they'll a lot of times have video, audio, or in the older days, just minutes of meetings, and you can catch quotes and things like that that people say inside the meetings, things that people have stood for, legislation or ordinances that they have tried to pass, not necessarily just the ones that did pass, but if someone sponsors legislation or sponsors an ordinance and says, geez, I really believe that this is what we need to do, even if it doesn't pass, it sticks to them to where you can say, well, this is what they stand for. This is what defines them. There's also opposition research can be polling. And I'll show you an example of that. So I have a cajillion things open here. There we go. Okay, so you should see on your screen a thing that says RGA, Republican Governors Association. Yes?
Yes.
Okay, cool. All right, so this is a poll that just came out the other day about Christine Drazan and everything. And this is opposition research right here, where it talks about how people view the different pieces of the opposition. And so we're looking at things like Joe Biden. That's opposition research, even though he's not running for governor of Oregon. But we're looking at favorables and unfavorables for the different candidates that have been there or candidates that currently have the spot. And so we're looking at things like this, where 51% of voters say that Kate Brown has done a poor job. So that's opposition research, because Tina Kotek's in the same party as Kate Brown and really is not very different from Kate Brown, except she's probably a little bit more liberal. So what we're seeing here is opposition research that tells us that voter sentiment is saying it's probably not a great thing that Kate Brown is in office, and we can tie Tina Kotek to Kate Brown ideologically. Let's see here. The third part is a little bit more personal, and it's, sorry, I'm looking at the chat here. Okay. The other one is a little bit more personal, is when you get private investigators involved. So there are a couple of different types of private investigations that come out, and you can do this with a real private investigator, or you can hire a researcher, and researchers will go on and typically look at like Facebook posts, and they'll look at legislative records and things like that. And that's what I would call like a passive or public investigation. And then you have something that's a little bit more active, like field work is what we call it. And that's where you actually send somebody out to do something. So I'll show you an example of passive and public information. And these are things that sometimes a private investigator has access to, things that are more difficult for you and I to have access to, things like police records. This is a person that ran for mayor of Gresham, Eddie Morales, and we beat him by 14 votes. He spent $130,000, and this mugshot, because he was a perpetual DUI defendant, we turned this piece plus all of the opposition research that we did into this, which is the mail piece that went out to 10,000 people in the city of Gresham. Eddie Morales was the treasurer of the Democratic Party of Oregon, and he had been arrested for a DUI just a couple years before. And the mugshot is actually from his 1997 arrest. And he had a police report from 2003, which I had highlighted here, where he assaulted a woman in a parking lot and dragged her across by her hair. And so we put this in a little tear out to show that that's what he had done. We also found that Gresham Antifa had made a reference to Eddie Morales standing with the community against white supremacy. And so we put on there, Eddie is the only candidate for Gresham mayor with support from Antifa. All of this came from our investigation that the private investigator put together. Sorry, I've got a cat chewing on some envelopes that are kind of expensive. And another form of investigation is here. This is a candidate that was running against a good friend of mine in Yamhill County for county commission. And pardon me for a second. Get down.
Is it an unruly cat again?
Yeah, that was Alice Cooper. She's a kitten, and was chewing through a bunch of expensive envelopes there. So yeah, I had to.
Pardon me, Patrick. I'd like to change from my phone to my desktop. Can you please admit me to the meeting a second time?
Sure.
While you're doing that, I have a question and a comment. The question is, with opposition research, with like finding dirt on a candidate, how do you like present that without looking like you're like, mudslinging? Because according to polls, voters say, emphasis on say, I don't know about their actual action or not, say that they don't like to see those attack ads.
You're totally right. And I actually have a part of this presentation I've put together to address that. Because yeah, you're right. And if you don't mind, may I answer that toward the end after I've gone through some of the how and why and.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
And the comment I was going to make is with cats, I've noticed, at least with mine, before she passed, she loved dollar store toys.
Okay.
So that might be.
It's definitely not a lack of toys. It's the lack of me paying attention to her while I'm on this Zoom call. My house is covered in the toys. And hey, come on. Okay, so these are these passive public information pieces, and you can get this by hiring a public investigator. You can also go to different websites that will allow you to do background checks, and these are usually renters type websites that you could plug in somebody's name, and it'll do a very basic search. What that usually gives you is just a breadcrumb to follow it a little bit further to find out if they said, oh, there's somebody with this arrest at this one point, or usually what you get, because most people that are in politics are not career criminals. Mostly, like if you look at mine, you'll find like 4 speeding tickets and a parking ticket. Sorry about that, which leads to nothing. It's just nothing that you can really do. But if you're lucky enough to get something like this, where you have a disheveled looking mugshot and you have all of this, convicted, guilty, Yamhill, these are things that can go out in either a mail piece or a digital campaign to show the voters that maybe this is not a person that you want in charge of public safety. So let me get back in. Let's see. So agencies is the other way we can do this besides private investigation is by doing public records requests. And I said earlier, there's a difference between FOIA, which is Freedom of Information Act, which is a federal law, and public records requests. Now, any public agency in Oregon is required to keep public records, and you are capable of reviewing those. Now, the way you do that is each agency has these things set up, and I will show you like the Treasury. I pulled up the Treasurer's public records screen here. So if you go to the office of the Oregon State Treasury, and I ran a campaign for Jeff Goodman against Tobias Reed, and we looked at this. Okay, so you see this little logo right here, this T with the 3 yellow arrows going up. Well, that appeared once Tobias took office. And so I thought that was a little suspect because it used to just be like the seal of Oregon that said Department of Treasury. So I did a public records request through this website, and you would click one of these buttons like request public records related to a Treasury program. And this will take you to a screen that will allow you to fill in all of your information. And I actually have an account. So you submit it and then you articulate what it is you're looking for. In this case, I was looking for, what did he pay for this? What did he pay somebody to make a T that looks like Tobias, by the way, with 3 arrows? And we found that the Treasury spent about $500,000 on that T. And so that ended up being something that we made an issue in the campaign of, what's Tobias Reed spending your money on? $500,000 to change the seal of Oregon to a T. And so that's one of the ways you can use it. Let me go back to stop the share here. So things that are public records requests in Oregon, you have any state agency, any county agency, any city agency, they will all have a website that you can just Google public records requests. So if Michelle, if you're looking for a county commission information, you can go to that county. They'll have either a public information person or they'll have a community liaison. Usually these things have to go through an attorney to make sure that they're redacting everything on the records request that doesn't match your specific search. So you have to be kind of sly about how you make it. So, because you want to catch as much information as possible. So you want to make it narrow enough that it doesn't cost you $1 kajillion. You don't want to say, I want all of the information from John Smith's email from January 1, 2013 till today. That's not a reasonable public records request. But if you said, I need to know, I'd like to have all correspondence between John Smith and the Associated Federal Municipal Union, what it asked me, anybody that came from AFSCME on the subject of negotiating contracts between this period of time. That's a totally reasonable public records request. And that's something that they can fill. But what they would do is the lawyers would take that and any contact information for people that are irrelevant to the conversation, they would redact that. Does that make sense?
Yep.
All right, so additional things that you can get for public records requests that you may not have thought of. The DMV, right? The DMV has records of things. One of those that we narrowly escaped on when I was working on, I'll be a little vague about this, but I was working on a campaign where my client was going to be on a motorcycle for a TV shoot, and he was an older guy, and I know he hadn't ridden a motorcycle in a while. And I asked him, do you have a license to ride a motorcycle? And he said, well, you don't need a license, you need an endorsement. And I was like, all right, whatever. Do you have an endorsement to drive a motorcycle? And he said, no, I don't. I said, well, you know what this looks like if you get, on a motorcycle and we put you on television and they do a public records request of the DMV and they find that you are not licensed to drive that motorcycle, you can get in a lot of trouble and they're going to make it a big campaign issue. And so when he shot that commercial, he actually had a learner's permit and there was someone following him behind to comply with the law. So these are things that, remember, turnabout's fair play and they can come after you as well. But these are things that the other side is really good at, of realizing what they have to do to find any flaw in any piece of your campaign. Another thing that you can do is like fishing and hunting licenses. I don't know if you guys remember Jimmy Crumpacker versus Newt Bueller versus Cliff Bentz, but Jimmy Crumpacker had his shotgun and he was talking about being a sportsman and he's got his Carhartt jacket and he's in the middle of Bend. Well, the Bueller campaign did a public records request and found that Jimmy had gotten a hunting license the day before that photo shoot. And that was super damaging for Jimmy. And really, Jimmy just didn't actually hunt much except on private lands. He hunted birds that were part of their, so, I mean, he was a real outdoorsman, but they made him look like, they defined him. They defined him as a downtown Portland elitist that really was faking it. And so that's, I mean, probably the greatest example of someone being defined by their opponent was Jimmy Crumpacker, who, he's a great Republican candidate, very smart, and he allowed himself to get defined very early and very badly and unfairly. The other thing you can do is the emails from public officials. I touched on this just a little bit. When you're getting emails from a public official, or when you're considering all that, realize that anytime a public official is writing an email or a text message or anything, whether it's from their personal accounts or their public accounts, if they're discussing public policy, it is attainable through a public records request. Unfortunately, that's largely theoretical, because if they dig in their heels and decide to fight you on it, you don't have a ton of recourse other than an expensive lawsuit. And by the time it gets to court and they've deleted the thing, there's not much you can do. So you have to be a little diplomatic in how you present that. There's still flaws in the system, but know that when you make a public records request and you say you want public records from that person's accounts, make sure you also say that their personal accounts as well, because some lawyers and some information technology departments that fulfill these requests are going to be pretty picky about that. They're going to make sure that the person gets there. One of my absolute most favorite things is one that they burned me on when I ran in my campaign. It's that 911 calls are actually public record. And I was able to turn this around on them just a little bit. But with 911 calls, you can reach out to the Bureau of Emergency Communications, or BOEC, and get, based on the phone number, say how many 911 calls have come through this system. Well, in my case, I lived across from a middle school parking lot, and I saw all kinds of crazy, dangerous stuff, including a man who was dragging a woman by her hair through the parking lot, or people doing really dangerous things. And the 911 center actually doesn't differentiate between the non-emergency line and the emergency line. So I lived there for 15 years, and I think I had 7 phone calls to 911 or something, and they were trying to make it look like I was constantly calling 911 when I maybe called 911 once or twice in the time that I lived there. But what they ended up getting me on, or trying to get me on, was my neighbors next door had said, they were going on vacation, and they said that the house on the other side had been broken into, and they asked me to just keep an eye on the house and see if anything suspicious is happening. And I went to the mailbox, and they have a little private street that goes back behind, kind of hidden from view. And there was a truck there, and there was a guy sitting in the passenger seat and no driver. And I thought that was a little suspicious. So I kind of went over there and looked, and the guy didn't acknowledge me. And so I came back. And so I called the non-emergency line and said, hey, can you swing by and just have somebody check it out and see, because there was a robbery just down the street, and it's just a little odd that this guy is sitting in the passenger seat. And they asked me what he looked like. And this is the thing, when you call 911 or a non-emergency line even, you don't realize that you're being recorded and it's public information. And so I wasn't using my best politically correct terminology. And when they said, what does he look like? I said, he's a Mexican guy. And that's not the right term. The right term is Latino. And so they ran a push poll asking voters if they cared that I referred to someone as a Mexican without knowing their actual heritage. So this is how in the weeds that it actually gets. It turns out the voters must not have cared, because even though that was a push poll that they ran, they ended up not running it as a campaign. Turns out the guy couldn't afford to, because the cops did swing by and take a look. Turns out the guy couldn't afford to go to lunch with his friends. He was on a landscaping crew, and they all went to lunch. And so he decided to just have a nap in the car. So
if I can interject for just a second, something like what you're talking about happened to Monica Webby, because you'll remember that there was a 911 call.
Oh yeah.
Her private life, and it ended up really being something she never recovered from.
Really? Yeah. I remember that. Andrew Miller. Yeah. These are big things. And so I actually used this in a campaign on the other side against Janelle Bynum, who is, she owns a couple of McDonald's franchises, and she's very anti-police. And so I did a public records request of the address of the McDonald's on 82nd and Foster. And it came back that the police had been called like 180 times in 1 year to this place. And so they had different levels of public records requests. So one is just a list of the types of calls, and that's very inexpensive. I think it might have cost me $50 to get that. And then I could get the actual audio from these calls for, I think it was like $200 per incident or $250 per incident. So I ordered 10 of them, and I ended up putting a 30-second ad together of all of the horrible crime that was going on in her restaurant while she was, voting against police issues and things. Of course, that's much bigger now that she's been there for a little while. But I was able to figure out how to turn that around on her. I have some recordings I could show you, but I think we're probably running right about on time. So if we have time at the end, I can play some of those for you. But you get it. They're frantic calls. There's somebody behind the counter, and someone's got a knife in the parking lot, or somebody's got a baseball bat, or somebody's locked themselves in the bathroom, and there's heroin and all. These things that paint a picture, because when you have these very visceral, real experiences and they're recorded, they're very compelling. I see that, Richard. Thank you. I do have a hard stop at 1:45. I have a thing that I've got to get to at 2:15 in Milwaukee. But thank you. One of the other things is getting moles, right? These are folks that sit on the county commission board. Say I assume, Michelle, your candidate has some allies on the board of county commissioners. And rather than have you sit through every one of those meetings, have one of your county commissioners that is on your side just jot down the notes while they're in the meeting to say, okay, at 6:38, they said this. And then you can go back and track through it and find that clip. And that way you're saving a lot of time and not going through hours and hours and hours of boring meetings. I have this everywhere I go. And the last thing I want to talk about for types of opposition research is one of the most fun is trackers. And I've actually got one going out on Tuesday to a city council meeting. And a tracker is a person that has a video camera and a little bit of training in public record law and why they are allowed to be in certain places. It's hard to get trackers into private events, but even at things like Dan Mason has this great event called the Reagan Day Dinner. And I remember Newt Bueller was speaking at one, and a tracker had paid his fee to get into the event, and he stood in the back and he had his video camera up and he recorded Newt the whole time, and he paid his ticket. So he was there, and Newt wasn't going to say anything weird anyway, but these are professional folks. And I have one on my, list of people that I use, and they know how to get it. They know the angles you need to take. You tell them what you're hoping to get out of it. You want a reaction from the dais, or you want to get somebody on record, or you have somebody that's going to plant a question that's going to put that person on the record and might surprise them, and they might speak off the cuff and say something more candidly than they would hope to. And so that's what a tracker is. And so you can find them with places like there's a group called America Rising that I've used before that is a conservative tracking group. Oh, thank you, Michelle, for the question. I actually, yeah, I'll go ahead and answer that. I have that for a little later, but I'll answer that. So one of the pitfalls to things like tracking or recording phone calls or videos is Oregon law. And so I would be really, really careful to make sure that you familiarize yourself. I can't give you any legal advice here because I'm not a lawyer, but there are certain laws based on the type of recording that you're doing. So if you are on the phone, there's one set of laws. If you are in public, there's another set of laws. The easiest place you can be is a public place that has no I'm searching for the word. That's not private. That is you don't have the presumption that you're having a private conversation because there are other people around. And so if you're in public, it's pretty clear. Trying to do that with like a hidden camera is real sketchy. Whenever I have my trackers go, the camera's large and it's very, very apparent that recording is taking place. You can also do that. Right, I'm not a lawyer. I don't play one on TV. It's something that you really need to understand before you do it. And there's a difference between video taping and just audio taping. I know Richard mentioned I'm in real estate, and one of the things that we have to deal with now is the fact that everyone has cameras in their homes, and homeowners are not familiar with these sort of laws, and they can be pretty curious about how things are going at their open houses and things like that. And there was actually a case in Arizona where 2 real estate agents had been meeting in this house to have an affair, and they were doing that in one of the bedrooms. And the people caught them because they had a camera in the bedroom. And because it's not a public area of the house, it's not like a living room or the entryway or something, the real estate agents actually won their lawsuit because there's no, that's the word I was saying, presumption of privacy. There's a presumption of privacy, even if it's not your house. So be conspicuous is what I would recommend, and declare that you're recording. I believe, and don't quote me on this, but I believe on the phone, it's one-party consent. So that means that if you record something on the phone, it can be used later. And there's also, if you're doing it for your own purposes, even though it might be illegal, as long as you're not using it for anything, I don't know that someone would be able to call you on it. If it's useful to figure out that you have to try to duplicate that somewhere in public, so be it, I guess. But don't do anything illegal. But that's what trackers are for. That's why you use the professionals, so that you don't get yourself in trouble. Did that answer your question?
Right. I think that it seems to me that yes, it's one-party consent for recording, but if you're going to use that recording publicly, you need to have consent for it. Is how I understand it. Unless you have a private investigator's license, you'd have to declare that you're making that recording to the other party.
Yeah, it's always, if you're trying to be completely abundantly cautious, it's always a good idea to disclose everything, like over disclose as much as you can. And really with political campaigns, people are sort of used to people coming in with cameras, and I think having a large conspicuous camera is completely reasonable in all this. Recording without consent, I had somebody do that to me, somebody trying to get me on the record in the legislature. I found out later that a staffer for one of the state reps, Val Hoyle was her name, she's now running for Congress. 2 of her staffers came into my office after hours when Val and I were just hanging out socially, and one of the staffers had recorded the entire thing, and there was nothing salacious about it, but they were trying to get something out of me. So people are dirty, so just be careful. So how do you use it in campaigns? Well, there are the 3 types of major persuasion elements of a campaign. Is you have the positive stuff, which is like an intro piece or puffing yourself out to say, this is who I am, this is what I stand for. The contrast pieces are in the middle. And that's where opposition research starts to come in to say, this is what they believe, this is what I believe, and here's what backs it up. Because whenever you say that someone else believes something, you need that little asterisk and the source to put down there. Otherwise, a lot of places won't run the spots, or they can sue you for not disclosing where you got that information. The third is the dirtiest of all the political stuff, is just the straight up negative, like the one that I showed you about Eddie Morales. And that's not promoting your candidate. That's saying this person is unfit. Here's why they're a terrible person. And to your earlier point of what you were saying about, can it backfire? Yes, it can. And so it's always best to have allies in this business that can do that without coordinating with you and without it coming from you. Because if if you know that somebody's done some horrible things and you stand up at a town hall and say, hey, John Smith beats his wife, 3 days a week, even if it's true, you kind of look like a jerk for bringing up something that may not be related to policy. But if Western Liberty Network, for example, if they were to get involved with campaigns and things like that, they could get involved with that campaign and say, hey, this guy beats his wife 3 days a week. And that way it's not coming from you, but you can't coordinate with Western Liberty Network on that. You could, make sure that they knew that there was something to look for. And if they found it and then ran that spot, that's legal. But yeah, you can't coordinate with things like that. So, but using surrogates for those type of things is a very useful thing. I never like my candidates to go directly negative on something unless it's just strictly policy. And that's where 99% of this needs to be anyway. I really only like using things like the piece that I showed you when you have a real nasty villain like Eddie Morales. Do I run preemptive oppo on our candidates? Absolutely. We call that self-research or opposition research on the candidate. And yes, we've done all that. And I do that for the bigger races mostly. What's nice about that is it's cheaper because you have a candidate that you can sit down with and say, what am I going to find? And they will tell you what they're going to find. And if they're honest with you, then you just find where the evidence is. And so you can anticipate what's going to come. And so things like what you don't want to have is have a candidate up on stage and someone says, we're concerned about your ability to handle this financially because we see that you have a bankruptcy in your past. But if you know that your client has a bankruptcy and you've researched it, and say you find that, well, they had a heart transplant or something, and it was a medical bankruptcy. People are really sympathetic to medical bills. And so if your candidate doesn't look strange and like, oh, well, yeah, I had the bankruptcy, but I don't, blah, blah. If they're able to say, I had a medical bankruptcy 8 years ago when my husband left me, and I was left with this 3-year-old child and all of the medical bills from their surgery. And then no one cares that you had the bankruptcy. So yeah, opposition research on yourself is very important.
Hey, if I could interject one thing here real quick, Patrick.
Yes, sir.
One thing I've noticed in my situation and others is that there is a difference between how opposition research is received by the electorate if the race involved is a small, local, nonpartisan race where people are working as volunteers, like water board, not school board so much, but water board, fire and rescue, those kind of things. People are more tolerant of it. At the higher level races like school board, county commissioner, and so on. If you go after people who are running for a volunteer position, a lot of times oppo research that isn't based on policy, it backfires.
Agreed. Yeah, the smaller races, you get people that are a lot more angry when you go negative on things. So you have to just be careful about it. You have a good consultant that can navigate that with you. That's important for sure. And if you're on the water board, it's probably not relevant if you had 2 DUIs. But if you're running for mayor of a big city, probably is. So diving deeper is the other way you can use the opposition research. If your opposition research gives you something that you feel like, well, that's a little off, I need to figure out what else is going on, you can then turn like a private investigator on to something that you see in there that maybe they posted something on social media that was tagged and said that they were in Oregon City at Clackamat Park on this date. And you're like, well, that's the date that they had the riot, right? Then you can send your private investigator out to start crawling all of social media to see if you can find a photo of the candidate participating in a riot at Clackamat Park. So those are the kind of things that you can use opposition research for. And on my last section of this, I have some of the cautions that we already talked about. And thank you for your question earlier about having it backfire. there are two reasons why it can backfire. Number one, you go too far, or number two, it's not relevant. And you really have to weigh those things. We have a tendency when we're running campaigns or when it's our own campaign to think that people care. And a lot of times they don't. You know, there's a lot of times people are not as concerned with the background or some little piece of drama that's in somebody's history, because everybody's got something. And so people may not care. And if you try to make an issue out of something that they don't care about, they just see you as petty. And so it's best not to do any of that. And to remember that turnabout's fair play. You'll definitely get as good as you give. And I have certainly been the target of plenty of opposition research. I even had, I was going door to door campaigning in a neighborhood in Happy Valley, and it was the house belonged to the dean of Clackamas Community College that I had worked for 8 or 9 years prior. And he said that a private investigator had been by the previous week and knocked on his door to talk to him about me, even though I'd never met this guy, to ask if there was any disciplinary things or I knew of me, or, you know, it was just, it was pretty surreal how the depths that they'll go to. So definitely know the laws when it comes to recording. Definitely know the laws too. I mean, I know I've had my trash gone through. My friend Matt Wands, who has, he ran in Troutdale, the unions really targeted him more so than me, even, to where they would send union thugs down to his favorite local bar to pick fights with him with video cameras rolling in the background to try to get him to react. So there's all sorts of real shady stuff that happens. Don't be a part of that. My rule of thumb is no matter what the information is that you get, if you're promoting it, make sure that it's intellectually honest, not just defensible in a court, because the public messaging for political campaigns is real vague and real flexible when it comes to interpretations of the truth. Everything that I do is absolutely defensible. I don't stretch the truth. There's plenty out there. If you're running against a bad person, you can demonstrate that they're a bad person, and you don't need to try to exaggerate or anything like that. So with that, I can probably take one question and then I got to jump out the door.
So for the opposition research on yourself, I totally forget what it was called. Is it possible that you could like email us like a list or something? That way we can ask
What you're looking for? First thing you do is go through social media, which is going to take a long time, because that's the first thing your opponent's going to do. And don't assume that because it's private to your friends that one of your friends won't be a mole for them. That happens all the time. So I would go, and before you run for office or your friend runs for office, go through and kind of scrub your social media, go through and see if there's anything that really looks out of place or you know, something different. I remember with mine, there was a big scandal when I first started running for office, and all the lobbyists were talking about, oh man, there's a picture of Sheehan at a gay club. And I'm like, first of all, who cares if I'm at a gay club? I wasn't, but who cares? It turns out it was a photograph of a friend of mine who was at a cage fight. He was a fighter in an octagon, and he had just lost his fight, and he came out, and it's a photo of the two of us, and I've got my arm around him, but he's not wearing a shirt because he was just in a fight. And so, and there were lights up for the thing. And so, yeah, that's one of those things that just be prepared to explain it. But if you do have some crazy photos of stuff out there, you know, maybe go through and scrub them. If you're shooting, if you're in the woods and you've got 2 AR-15s in your arms and you're blasting them in the air, just know that could end up on a postcard.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's that. And then just a regular look through. I mean, it'll cost you $50 to have like Intellis or one of those services. Just do a quick search to see if there's anything in your, you know, criminal history or anything. I mean, you know best, you know, what's in your background. And if you have an idea of something that you've done a while ago that you're not proud of, and you want your investigator to see if there's evidence of it somewhere and gauge that, then go do it.
Awesome.
One
Thank
other
you.
thing, don't keep anything from your campaign staff. Have a come to Jesus meeting, make sure they're not blindsided. That's what happened to Monica. There are other things that go on, because if you do have something compromising in your past and you let your campaign staff know about it ahead of time, you can come up with some sort of a reply for when it comes out that makes it look like you're organized in a way to minimize the damage.
Yeah, I wrote a 15-page crisis communication plan for a client of mine recently that he had probably the biggest scandal of the gubernatorial race, and it lasted 3 days and it was gone. And it did affect our fundraising toward the end, through the end. But as far as it was the kind of thing that usually it just stops a campaign. And in this case, because it was handled well, we had national news about how well it was handled and how this is just a normal guy and we all have stuff. So, all right. Well, thank you guys so much.
And thank you, Patrick. Your experience is helpful. I think this is fantastic. I want to remind folks that I provided a couple of files that talk in a little more detail about some of the things that Patrick mentioned. And I want to remind everyone of the resources that are available free online on the westernlibertynetwork.org website. And we will be back with another training on a different topic at 1 p.m. next Saturday. I want to thank you very much. And Patrick, you're great. You take care, and everybody have a great weekend.
Thanks, everybody. Best to you. Good luck.
Thank
Yes.
you.